No one wanted her. The entire universe had turned its back. But then one human appeared, and when she gave him her hand, everything changed for Lyara. Lyara walked through the corridors of Veloria with the kind of careful precision one reserves for navigating a minefield. Only this minefield consisted of sideways glances, whispered jokes, and the occasional involuntary snicker that ricocheted off the crystalline walls like poorly tuned chimes. She tugged at her tunic, which shimmered faintly under the ambient bioluminescent lighting, as if even her clothing wanted to join in the city's ongoing judgment of her. Her long, delicate ears twitched, picking up every subtle nuance of ridicule from the other Valorians as they passed by, their eyes darting toward her in thinly veiled curiosity or unmasked disdain. They didn't exactly hate her. They just didn't want her around. That was the polite version. She suppressed a sigh and muttered under her breath, "And they wonder why I talk to plants." A nearby fern-like organism on a pedestal responded with a polite sway, or perhaps it was just a draft. She didn't care enough to figure it out. Humor was her armor, and sarcasm her shield. In the halls of Valoria, where everyone else seemed polished, predictable, and terrifyingly competent, Lyara had long ago accepted that her value lay somewhere between curious anomaly and embarrassing spectacle. By the time she reached the observation deck, she was ready to vanish into the glittering void of the nebulae beyond the city's glass dome. The stars stretched across the horizon like spilled gemstones, their light refracted through the layers of crystalline structures in the city, casting kaleidoscopic patterns that danced on her pale skin. She perched on the edge of a floating platform, dangling her legs into the seemingly endless emptiness, and for a moment allowed herself to forget that Valoria's residents would happily ignore her if it meant they could maintain the illusion of perfection in their society. It was then that she noticed him, a human, stumbling awkwardly across the docking bay of the observation deck, the metallic thrums of his boots clanging against the anti-gravity rails in a rhythm entirely his own. He was struggling with a device strapped to his chest, blinking frantically as holographic projections erupted around him like miniature fireworks. Lyara arched an eyebrow and, despite herself, let out a laugh, a high, tinkling sound that seemed almost inhumanly melodic, echoing in the chamber. The human froze. He waved one hand in the air, eyes wide beneath the dome of his helmet. Greetings. Do you understand me?" His words were garbled through the translation device, making the attempt sound like a badly programmed ringtone. "Yes, I understand you perfectly," Lyara said, her voice smooth, lightly amused. "You, my dear human, are spectacularly bad at this whole landing in a foreign city thing. I haven't seen someone trip over physics like that since." She trailed off, smiling at a memory of some particularly chaotic Valorian ceremony she had accidentally ruined. "Never mind. Sit down or, hover carefully, whatever humans do." The human tilted his head. "Hover?" Lyara rolled her eyes. "Yes, gravity, it's complicated. Don't ask questions you'll regret." She extended a hand, a mixture of mock formality and genuine curiosity. "I'm Lyara, and you are, what?" "A very lost, very fragile, highly entertaining human." "Joren," he replied, straightening his posture as best he could with his awkward bulk. "And yes, lost seems accurate. Fragile maybe. Entertaining is, debatable." He glanced down at his feet, then back at her, a flush visible even through the reflection of his helmet. Lyara chuckled. "Debatable is fine. I enjoy a challenge. Come on, let's get you stabilized before you accidentally vaporize yourself or a passing merchant." She moved with fluid grace, gliding across the platform with minimal effort, her long ears flicking as if alert to every tiny detail. Joren followed, arms flailing slightly, trying to imitate her effortless motion. "What are those?" he asked suddenly, pointing at a series of floating panels projecting what looked like holographic plants, shimmering and rotating slowly in midair. "They're the public gardens," Lyara said with a mischievous grin. "Valoria has a thing about aesthetics. It's supposed to make everyone feel enlightened. Personally, I think it mostly confuses visitors and gives people like me a good laugh." She reached out and tapped one of the panels. The projection wobbled like gelatin, then blinked back into perfect form. "See, harmless chaos. Joren's mouth opened and closed like a fish. It moves. Of course it moves. Everything moves. You just don't notice it until it smacks you in the face, Lyara replied, her tone teasing, but not unkind. She noticed that he had stopped stumbling, his curiosity momentarily eclipsing his terror. That was progress, a small victory in a universe that seemed determined to remind them both how much they didn't belong. They wandered further into the observation decks, where the city's gravity systems allowed platforms to float independently, shifting slightly like rafts in a cosmic tide. Lyara made a show of guiding Joren, though mostly it consisted of watching him bump into panels, hover awkwardly over gaps, and offer faintly apologetic smiles to passing Velorians who pretended not to notice him. The humor of it all kept her from sinking too deeply into the loneliness she usually felt in these halls. "Do your people always wear those helmets?" she asked, nodding at his bulky headgear, which had clearly been designed more for intimidation than practicality. "They're protective," Joren said, gesturing vaguely. "And yes, usually. On a normal day, I might not need it, but in a city where physics is optional, yes." He gave a wry smile that made Lyara's ears twitch in amusement. "I assume you don't need one." "I do not," she said. "Although sometimes I wish I did. Not for protection from the elements, no, our weather isn't that cruel, but from people who can't take a joke." She paused. "Which, coincidentally, includes most of my relatives." "Relatives, huh?" Joren said, eyes darting around as though imagining the Valorian hierarchy descending on them. "I can relate. My brother thinks I'm a cosmic disaster." "He's probably right." Lyara snorted. "Cosmic disaster. I like that. Maybe we're kindred spirits then, both disasters of our respective species." They reached the edge of the observation deck, where the city fell away into a curtain of nebulae and stars. Lyara extended a hand, not for guidance this time, but to gesture toward the vast expanse. "Look at that. Do you know how many people have walked these platforms and never really looked?" Joren followed her gaze, eyes widening as the colors of the nebula shimmered and pulsed, folding in on themselves like living ribbons of light. I've never seen anything like that," he admitted, voice almost reverent. Lyara smiled, a rare, unguarded smile that lit her fair skin and made her blue hair glint like liquid sapphire. "That's because you weren't supposed to. And maybe, just maybe, some things are only for those who manage to survive the idiocy of interspecies social norms long enough to appreciate them." She gave him a teasing look. "Which, by the way, you're doing okay-ish, barely, but acceptable." Joren chuckled, his laughter echoing strangely in the vast space as though the stars themselves were amused. "I'll take it. Barely acceptable is my specialty." Lyara's ears flicked, her amusement tinged with something softer, something rare and unspoken. "Good," she said, "because you're going to need that specialty. Valoria is chaotic, absurd, and occasionally deadly, and you're stuck with me. Welcome to the galaxy's most polite rejection." Joren's smile faltered for a moment, but then he nodded, as if accepting the challenge of whatever this strange alliance might bring. Lyara, in turn, allowed herself a brief, mischievous thought. Maybe being unwanted wasn't so terrible when the one person who mattered was utterly ridiculous, entirely human, and, against all odds, still trying to keep up. And so, as the nebulae stretched out endlessly before them and the city hummed in quiet chaos, Lyara and Joren began their improbable partnership, punctuated by bad jokes, accidental bumps, and the first sparks of a bond that neither of them fully understood yet. But both would come to rely on, in ways neither could have predicted. Lyara led Joren deeper into the heart of Valoria, the city that was equal parts crystalline marvel and bureaucratic labyrinth. The floating walkways here were narrower, twisting in unpredictable arcs, supported by streams of magnetic energy that hummed faintly beneath their feet. Joren flailed more than walked, his arms slicing the air like he was conducting an invisible orchestra of chaos. Lyara couldn't help but laugh, the sound light and teasing, a musical contrast to the low vibrations of the anti-gravity motors. "Careful, those panels will file a formal complaint if you step on them wrong," she called, half mocking, half serious. "Panels file complaints?" he asked, wobbling dangerously as he nearly collided with a rotating data sphere that emitted a quiet boop in protest. Yes, very seriously, you've awakened the bureaucratic conscience of Veloria. Do you know what you've done? She tapped her temple with one delicate finger, smirking. I'm not sure you're prepared for the paperwork that will follow. Joren stared at her, blinking behind the reflective visor of his helmet. I think I need a translator, or a stiff drink, or maybe both. Lyara grinned, her long ears flicking sideways. Welcome to my world. Drinks are optional, but the paperwork is relentless. They rounded a corner where the corridors opened into a series of hovering platforms, each decorated with small holographic gardens. The plants were alive in a way that was almost comical, flowers that shifted colors as if arguing over fashion choices, vines that recoiled when approached too closely, and luminous fungi that occasionally twitched as though dancing to a rhythm only they could hear. Lyara reached out and touched a violet bloom, which shivered and promptly changed its hue to a cheerful orange. See, it has a sense of humor, she said. Or it's terrified, either way amusing. Joren leaned over, careful this time, and poked a spindly vine. It recoiled with a sharp snap, and he yelped. It bit me. Friendly warning, Lyara said, trying not to laugh too hard. Veloria's flora can be prickly, figuratively and literally. They like you already, though. It's a rare human compliment. As they navigated the maze of gardens, Lyara began to talk, half to explain, half to amuse herself. You know, humans think the universe is this vast, scary place, but really it's just complicated. Like a really bad soap opera. The stakes are high, the scenery is dramatic, and everyone looks stunning, even when they're failing spectacularly. Joren chuckled, his earlier fear dissolving into fascination. That actually makes sense. I didn't expect Valoria to be like this. I thought it would be rigid, dull, monotone. Lyara waved a hand. Rigid is what they want you to think. Dull is what they accuse me of being. Monotone, well, let's just say that anyone who thinks Valoria is monotone clearly hasn't met my Aunt Lyra. She argues with the nebulae on principle. Joren laughed so hard that he nearly lost his balance. Lyara caught him just in time, steadying his awkward frame. See, she said, her voice softening. We make a good team. You stumble, I catch. I talk, you laugh. Basic partnership. Intergalactic model standard. They continued walking, or more accurately, floating along the twisting pathways. Lyara led him to the city's archive, a massive chamber of luminescent spheres suspended in midair. Each sphere contained knowledge, records of events, and sometimes gossip that Valoria considered important enough to preserve. Lyara plucked a sphere from the air and held it before Joren, who leaned forward like a child staring at a firefly. These spheres, she said, contain everything. History, science, etiquette guides, recipes for desserts that glow in the dark, and occasionally the occasional mildly incriminating anecdote about the city council. But mostly it's the desserts. The council is busy. Joren's eyes widened. Desserts that glow? Oh yes, Lyara said, grinning. Aurora custard, starlight truffles, nebula soufflés. And if you're lucky, you'll get a side of bureaucracy to chew on while you eat. He laughed again, and for a moment, the two of them simply existed in that absurd space, surrounded by knowledge and light, free from the judgmental stares of the Valorian society that had rejected Lyara. Humor, Lyara realized, was not just a shield, it was a bridge. It allowed her to connect with someone completely alien to her world without the constant sting of ridicule. Suddenly, a low alarm pulsed through the chamber, vibrating through the floating platforms. Lyara tensed, ears flicking. Oh no, she muttered. Not again. Joren glanced at her, worry knitting his brow. Not again, what is it? The energy grid, Lyara said, rolling her eyes. Sometimes Valoria likes to remind us that nothing here works exactly as it should. Occasionally, it decides to trap people in airless chambers for fun. Before Joren could panic, Lyara took his hand, gripping it firmly. Relax. You've already survived human landing protocols and Valorian flora. Airless chambers are just slightly more inconvenient. The corridor ahead flickered as the energy flux destabilized. A platform shuddered, and one of the luminescent spheres wobbled dangerously. Lyara shot out a hand, stabilizing the sphere with a flick of her wrist. See. Easy. Nothing to see here. Well, except for potential death, but we'll ignore that. Joren fumbled with his helmet controls, producing a stream of garbled translations. I think I can help, he stammered. Lyara raised an eyebrow, amusement tugging at the corners of her lips. Yes, please. You try, and I'll supervise, mostly by making sarcastic remarks about how spectacularly you're going to fail. His hands flew over the device strapped to his chest, fingers moving with surprising dexterity. Panels blinked, wires hummed, and for a few heartbeats, it seemed like the chamber might not swallow them whole. The low hum of the energy grid began to stabilize, and Lyara let out a soft whistle. Well, that was acceptable. Barely, but I'll take it. Joren grinned sheepishly. Acceptable, barely, that's a compliment, right? Absolutely, she said, smirking. By Valorian standards, you're practically a hero. If we survive this, I might even introduce you to a plant that doesn't try to kill you on sight. They emerged from the chamber, slightly disheveled but triumphant. Lyara brushed a strand of blue hair from her face and offered a mock bow. Survivors of Valoria's energy grid, 2 humans, 1 alien. Sound impressive. Joren laughed, a sound unburdened by fear now. I think so, though technically you're alien and I'm human, so it's more like one of each, surviving by luck and incompetence. Lyara flicked her ears, amused. Luck and incompetence. Yes, I can work with that. It's basically my life motto. As they continued through the city, Lyara pointed out hidden corners few Valorians visited. Gardens that only bloomed under specific magnetic currents, fountains that sang when approached in a certain rhythm, and libraries where the books floated lazily in the air, waiting to be caught and read. Each new discovery elicited laughter, shared glances, and a growing sense that their bond, absurd as it seemed, was becoming something stronger than either of them had anticipated. By the time they reached a small observation balcony overlooking the outer edge of the city, Lyara leaned on the railing, blue hair catching the light from the nebulae. Joren stood beside her, still awkward, still human, still marveling at the chaos and beauty around them. Liara's ears twitched, a soft, contented hum vibrating through her chest. You know, she said, half to herself, for someone who's supposedly clumsy and out of place, you're doing surprisingly well. Joren smiled. Thanks, I think. I'm learning from the best. Lyara laughed, the sound echoing off the distant stars. From the most spectacularly unwanted in Valoria, yes. You're welcome. I do teach excellence in absurdity. And in that moment, as the two of them looked out over a city that was both hostile and enchanting, Lyara felt a spark of something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time. Hope. Not the bright, naive kind, but the quiet, improbable sort that blooms when 2 entirely mismatched beings discover that the universe is perhaps a little less lonely than they thought. Humor, shared chaos, and a hand held in solidarity. It wasn't perfection, but it was theirs, and it was enough. Lyara and Joren moved cautiously through the inner precincts of Valoria. The corridors narrower here, walls of polished crystal bending the light in strange, dizzying patterns. The city hummed around them, alive with quiet surveillance, the occasional spark of energy cascading along conduits as if gossiping about their presence. Liara's ears twitched at every vibration, but her eyes were calm, scanning the path ahead. Joren followed, his bulky suit clanking softly, hands constantly adjusting controls, helmet reflecting the shifting colors of the crystalline walls. His nerves were there, yes, but tempered now by a kind of cautious confidence he hadn't possessed before. Lyara allowed herself a quiet smile. Progress, she thought, was measured not in perfection, but in surviving the absurdity of Valoria without spontaneously combusting. They had a mission. Not exactly an official mission, more like an accidental adventure sparked by curiosity, incompetence, and the delicate strands of trust that had grown between them. Lyara's people, the Valorians, had begun whispering about her in tones sharp and condescending, calling her a misfit, an embarrassment, a human sympathizer. She didn't mind, or rather she didn't let it control her anymore. She had learned that approval from people who were incapable of understanding her was not worth the effort. But their plans to exile dissenters had consequences, and that was something she couldn't ignore, especially now that a human, a very, very human Joren, had staked his presence on her side. You know, Joren said, glancing around at the twisting hallways that seemed to fold back on themselves like a Möbius ribbon, I still can't tell if this city hates me or is trying to eat me. Lyara snorted. Both are equally valid interpretations, but you're surviving, so technically the city loses. She flicked her wrist, activating a small personal shield that flared faintly around them. Mostly. Their destination was the council chamber, a massive sphere suspended by magnetic fields in the heart of Veloria. The elders of her people waited there, seated upon floating platforms, robes flowing and faces stern, their eyes reflecting every nuance of judgment the city had trained them to uphold. Lyara inhaled, a brief flicker of anxiety crossing her otherwise calm demeanor. Then she glanced at Joren. His hand hovered near hers, hesitating, awkwardly waiting for permission to grasp it. Lyara smiled and allowed it. A small gesture, but potent, a signal that neither of them was alone. The chamber doors slid open with a resonant hum, and the elders' voices rose in a chorus of indignation and protocol. Lyara of Valoria, one said, the tones sharp as fractured glass, your behavior is unacceptable. Your alliances are irregular, your loyalties questionable. Lyara tilted her head, ears flicking, her blue hair catching the ambient light. Irregular, questionable, dramatic words, but they do sound impressive. I might take notes. She gestured toward Joren. And yes, this is my companion. He's a human, surprisingly resilient, sometimes amusing. And absolutely necessary for my continued existence, apparently. A murmur rippled through the council. Some faces twisted in disapproval, others in confusion. Lyara, standing upright, felt a calm settle over her. The humor wasn't just for show, it was a shield, a bridge, a way to make even the most rigid protocols seem absurd. Joren, for his part, took a deep breath. I support her. She's not perfect. None of us are. But she's smart, brave, and frankly, she's worth it. And I would like to continue surviving Valoria, ideally with her, without being vaporized. His awkward phrasing earned a few suppressed chuckles, including from Lyara, whose ears flicked in amusement. The elders exchanged glances. One raised an eyebrow, a faint shimmer of amusement hidden beneath the formal severity. You dare speak for her, human? Yes, Joren said plainly, as though it were the most reasonable thing in the universe. And I think you'll find that sometimes outsiders make the best allies, or at least less annoying ones than the ones you already have. Lyara's ears twitched with suppressed laughter. She leaned toward him and whispered, You're ridiculous, but effective. The council deliberated, their whispers echoing in the chamber. Lyara and Joren stood side by side, hands brushing, neither quite letting go. Slowly, the tide of opinion shifted, not entirely, but enough. Enough to halt the exiling protocols, enough to allow Lyara to remain in her home without immediate threat, and enough to give Joren a peculiar sort of credibility among beings who had never known patience or subtlety. When the doors closed behind the departing elders, Lyara turned to Joren, her blue hair falling in a cascade of light across her shoulders. Well, she said, flicking her ears as if shrugging, we survived the council. Barely, but still survivable. I think I might even recommend you as a companion to anyone else I meet who's equally incompetent. Joren grinned, brushing imaginary dust from his suit. I'll take that as a compliment. Consider it a prophecy, Lyara replied, smiling. Her voice softened. You know, I used to believe that no one would ever care for me, that no one could. That's why I hid in the shadows, made jokes, and tolerated insults as if they were badges of honor. She paused, tilting her head. But you proved me wrong. Not by being perfect, not by saving me or my city. You did it by laughing, stumbling, and insisting on being part of my life anyway. You made me trust. And that's more than I've ever allowed before. Joren's hand tightened around hers. I'm not perfect, you know that. Lyara smirked, leaning slightly closer. I know, and that's why it works. Imperfect people are interesting. Perfect people are terrifyingly boring. You, my human friend, are fascinatingly imperfect. They wandered back toward the outer edges of the city, where the observation platforms extended into the velvet darkness of space. Lyara paused, letting the nebulae wash over them in shifting ribbons of color, violet, amber, sapphire, reflecting in her fair skin and the blue glint of her hair. Joren tilted his helmet, watching the spectacle, speechless for once. "Do you see now?" Lyara asked quietly. "The universe isn't a place to be feared. It's a place to navigate, to laugh in, and occasionally to trip over while learning something new. You and I, we've stumbled through a lot, and yet we're still here, together." Joren finally found words. "Yes, together, and somehow it feels like enough." Lyara's ears flicked once, a subtle gesture of approval. "It is enough. Not because the city accepts us, not because the council deems it appropriate, but because we chose it. And sometimes, choosing is stronger than being chosen." A small burst of static ran along the railing, and one of the nebula holograms nearby wobbled and blinked. Joren reached to steady it, fumbling slightly, and Lyara laughed, a clear, melodic sound that filled the quiet. "See, chaos is inevitable, humor is optional, and trust is revolutionary." Joren tilted his head, smiling at her. "Revolutionary, I like that." They stood side by side, looking outward, their hands intertwined. Valoria sparkled beneath them, a city both cruel and breathtaking, full of rules, lights, and whispers. Lyara, once unwanted and cast aside, now found herself capable of embracing the absurdity of her life, strengthened by the bond with a human who had stumbled into her world and refused to leave. She understood now that rejection had not defined her. It had prepared her. Prepared her for laughter, for trust, and for a courage that was quiet but enduring. As the stars shimmered and the nebulae danced, Lyara leaned her head slightly toward Joren, blue hair brushing against his shoulder. "No one wanted me," she whispered, more to herself than him. "So I gave my hand to the human alone, and somehow that was enough." Joren's hand squeezed hers gently. "It's more than enough. It's perfect in its own ridiculous way." And there, suspended between a city of crystals and the endless swirl of stars, Lyara realized that the universe had not turned its back on her. She had chosen her own place within it. She had chosen laughter in the face of absurdity, trust in the presence of uncertainty, and companionship where she had once known only solitude. The city hummed, the nebulae glowed, and for the first time in her life, Lyara felt that she belonged, not because anyone else had given her permission, but because she had decided that she did. And Joren, awkward, human, and steadfast, was by her side, hand in hand, ready to stumble forward with her into whatever strange, absurd, and beautiful chaos awaited next. They walked slowly back toward the edge of the observation deck, both of them smiling, both of them changed. Lyara no longer feared rejection. Joren no longer feared being lost. Together, they had discovered that acceptance, humor, and courage could flourish even in the most improbable of places, and that the universe, vast, indifferent, and endlessly strange, was still a place worth laughing in. For the first time, Lyara understood that being unwanted was not a limitation. It was an invitation. And she had accepted it entirely with a human who had stumbled into her life and refused to leave, making the galaxy feel a little less lonely, a little less cold, and infinitely more alive. Joren's hand squeezed hers gently. "It's more than enough. It's perfect in its own ridiculous way." And there, suspended between a city of crystals and the endless swirl of stars, Lyara realized that the universe had not turned its back on her. She had chosen her own place within it. She had chosen laughter in the face of absurdity, trust in the presence of uncertainty, and companionship where she had once known only solitude. The city hummed, the nebulae glowed, and for the first time in her life, Lyara felt that she belonged, not because anyone else had given her permission, but because she had decided that she did. And Joren, awkward, human, and steadfast, was by her side, hand in hand, ready to stumble forward with her into whatever strange, absurd, and beautiful chaos awaited next. They walked slowly back toward the edge of the observation deck, both of them smiling, both of them changed. Lyara no longer feared rejection. Joren no longer feared being lost. Together, they had discovered that acceptance, humor, and courage could flourish even in the most improbable of places, and that the universe, vast, indifferent, and endlessly strange, was still a place worth laughing in. For the first time, Lyara understood that being unwanted was not a limitation. It was an invitation. And she had accepted it entirely with a human who had stumbled into her life and refused to leave, making the galaxy feel a little less lonely, a little less